What do you know about Station 21?
Asked Len Gibson, the grizzled old forest ranger that was driving me out to my new posting. Not much. I spent most of my time with the Forest Service out west and just transferred to the East Coast recently. This is actually my first posting out here. He grunted, wrestling with the steering wheel of the four-wheel drive pickup as it bucked over the unusual trail, heavy underbrush and thick trees passing dangerously close on either side. The road was narrow, barely wide enough to accommodate the time-worn truck, and he was driving it a bit faster than I was comfortable with. I was surprised they assigned rangers to it though. It seems pretty remote, I said. We've been driving for a couple of hours on this trail already, and the lonely stretch of paved road we left earlier was little more than a distant memory at this point.
At one time, it used to be a fairly popular long hike trail that ran near it. The department wanted to make sure that we had a presence out here in case anyone got into trouble,
he said, never taking his eyes off the path ahead.
It was a pretty technical trail, and it was pretty common for city folk to underestimate the difficulty or the risk.
I frowned briefly. Used to be. It's not in use anymore? Gibson shook his head and spat out the open window.
Nah, too many people were getting injured on it. When a couple of them went missing entirely, the department decided it was too dangerous to maintain it as a sanctioned trail. It's tough to even spot anymore, unless you know what you're looking for. You'll find an old rope bridge near the cabin. That's about the only thing that lets you know it existed at all.
Then why maintain a posting here? I asked. He spared a quick glance at me and said,
You know the saying, if there's a station, there's a ranger. They'll probably get around to decommissioning it at some point, but for now.
At that moment, we rounded a bend in the trail, and the station came into view. It was built to look like a rustic log cabin and was planted in the middle of a desolate area of the surrounding forest, the gentle ridges surrounding the area creating a natural bowl. The trees here were dense and somehow foreboding, and the unkempt limbs, heavy with gray tendrils of Spanish moss, reached over the cabin and crowned the edges of the modest clearing. The entire area was a lush green, heavily shadowed by the canopy above, and the air was thick with the scent of the deep brush. He used the open clearing to turn the truck around and stopped it in front of the wooden door, emblazoned with the Forestry Service logo. Throwing it into park, he turned in his seat and looked at me expectingly. Not staying a while? I asked, opening my door and grabbing my overflowing duffel bag from the bed.
Nope,
he said, shaking his head.
My job is to transport rangers in and out of their postings around here. Used to be that each ranger'd have his own assigned vehicle, but the budget doesn't support that anymore.
I stepped back from the truck and shut the door, throwing the duffel bag over my shoulder. Where's the guy I'm relieving anyway? I asked, looking around.
Oh, that's Ed Marsh. Brought him out here a month ago, same as I brought you. A week ago, the guy that does the supply runs, he came out here and he found the station empty.
He said, something unspoken behind his light gray eyes. So what, he just disappeared? I asked disbelievingly. The old ranger scratched a moment at the 3-day growth of white stubbles on his cheek, as if trying to figure out how he wanted to phrase his answer.
Look, Miller, you seem like a nice guy. There aren't too many things in the area that'll threaten a man, aside from maybe a copperhead or the odd black bear. But neither of them are too common here. The truth is that some men just aren't built for the solitude and the isolation up here. Ed Marsh seemed solid enough, but he wouldn't be the first ranger to just up and leave his posting at Station 21.
I took another glance around the area before turning back to Gibson, patting the bulging canvas slug over my shoulder. Well, I've got plenty of books to occupy my time, and I brought a camera, so I'm expecting I'll be able to add some real great shots to my portfolio. He paused a moment before ducking his head in an amiable nod and barking a laugh.
That's good, kid. Keep yourself busy and the month will fly by before you know it. Elliot Barnes will be out here in a week or so to resupply you, but you should have plenty still in the cabin to carry you over.
I nodded my thanks to him and stepped back from the pickup as he threw it into gear and headed back off the way he came. I watched the tan and maroon 4x4 until it was lost to view, the sound of its whining engine lost to the trees. I found myself alone in front of the cabin, glad to be on solid ground after this morning's less than smooth ride out here. The sounds of nature, which had momentarily been muted when we arrived, slowly returned in force, the chittering of the squirrels and chipmunks somehow in harmony with the bird songs in the treetops. The air was cool and still as I stepped into the wooden porch that spanned the front of the cabin. I turned the knob and pushed the door inward. The interior of the station was Spartan and neat, divided into a small office space for visitors and a slightly larger living space for the ranger. I walked around the low wooden counter and through the open doorway that led to the new accommodations for the next month. It was relatively neat and organized. The ranger, who had been here before me, looked to have been fairly settled in his posting. I wondered briefly at why a forest ranger, accustomed to spending his time alone in the forest, would just decide one day to just pick up and leave. The trail back to the main road wasn't a difficult one to hike, but it was a long one. Of course, Ed Marsh had probably called a friend to come out and pick him up, but it still didn't make any difference. Regardless, it was a mystery for another day. The sun was beginning to set, and I still needed to get settled in and set for the night. By the time I had unpacked my stuff and started a fire in the cobblestone fireplace, night had fallen. The silence of the woodlands around me was a familiar comfort, different from the previous post in the Pacific Northwest, yet somehow the same. The air began to chill with the coming of night, and I had made my way around the cabin, locking the front door to prevent any curious critters from finding their way inside during the night. I left the windows open a bit for the airflow, and settling comfortably in a cushioned chair in front of the crackling fire with a bit of Johnny Walker I had comfortably packed, just enjoying the moment. Lost in my thoughts, my eyes wandered aimlessly around the room, taking in my new surrounding. I stopped when they settled upon the crumpled piece of paper that had been discarded and were hidden in the corner of the room near the bed. With a grunt of interest, I stood to the chair and took another swallow of the scotch, heading over and snatching the paper up from the floor. Returning to my seat in front of the fireplace, I set the glass on the low-end table to my right and smoothed the paper out on my knee. They looked like they had been torn out from a bound notebook, perhaps a composition notebook or a journal, and the handwriting was a bit sloppy, like cursive written in black pen. I raised an eyebrow in interest when I read the first page.
I got dropped off today by Ranger Gibson. I thought I was going to piss myself for the last half hour of the drive. I swear he hit every root and rock on that trail. The old bastard tried to spook me with the history of Station 21, but I'm not a rookie. I know how things are for new postings. I have to admit that Station 21 is a bit of a mystery, but it just adds to the charm of the place. I'll have plenty of time to get familiar with it.
I flipped to the next page.
Some sort of animal was outside the cabin last night. I'm glad I thought to close the door. The last thing I need is to wake up with a black bear rooting around in my provisions.
Amen to that, I thought, flipping to the next page.
I swear to Christ, if that old bastard's trying to scare me, I'm gonna beat his ass. I don't have any interest in playing any bullshit games and even less interest in going out into the middle of the night in the rain.
I didn't think that Gibson seemed the type of person to haze a new guy, but what did I know? I turned to the next page and continued reading.
Okay, I'm not sure what the hell was outside last night, but I don't think it was Gibson. There are no tire tracks anywhere nearby, and I can't find any boot prints in the mud this morning. Whatever it was too big to be a raccoon. Maybe a black bear, I guess? Need to be sure to keep things locked up. I'm starting to wish they gave me a rifle.
The last page was the strangest of the bunch.
I think I saw it today, out by the ravine, but I think it saw me too. I don't think it likes it when you notice it, because it sure took notice of me pretty damn quick after I spotted it. I gotta be more careful.
I reread the pages a few more times, pouring myself a bit more of the scotch and reclining back in the chair as I pondered what I had read. I must have drifted off at some point because I woke up to the sound of rain and thunder. The fire had died down to just embers, and a chill had replaced the comfortable warmth it had provided earlier. I stood from my chair and walked out to the window, looking out into the dark at the rain. Even with the heavy cloud cover, I could still make out the dim shapes of the trees beyond the clearing in front of the cabin. A gust of wind rose and blew the misting rain into my face through the screen. Not wanting to have to spend the next morning trying to dry everything out, I began walking around all the windows and closing them, lamenting the loss of the fresh air they permitted into the cabin's interior. I moved to the last window, the one nearest the main entrance to the ranger station, and froze. My brow creased as I squinted into the rainy darkness. I was pretty sure I had just seen a shape moving along the tree line, but I lost it when the storm intensified briefly and obscured my view. Staring into the darkness for a long minute, I reluctantly backed away and closed the last window, shaking off the uncomfortable feeling as best I could before moving over to the bed and dropping onto it without bothering to undress. Sleep quickly took me, and my dreams were filled with strange and unseen shapes hiding in the shadows at the edge of my awareness. By the time I rolled out of bed the next morning, all the remnants of the previous night's unease had vanished, and my mood was heightened as I faced the next morning at my new post. After a quick breakfast and a change into a fresh uniform, I threw open all the windows before stepping out of the cabin and into the damp early morning air. I dug my camera out of its case and threw its strap over my head as I set out. The first thing I wanted to do was take a look around the area and get a sense of my surroundings. Gibson had told me there was an old rope bridge that led to a decommissioned trail nearby, and after a quick look at the area's map in the ranger's office, I found that it was only 100 yards or so north of the station. I figured that would be as good of a place as any to start, and would probably provide some nice opportunities to get some dramatic shots. A narrow trail led into the tree line to my right as I stepped off the wooden porch and into the ankle-high grass of the clearing. A small sign with a white arrow was posted near the trail with a brief description: Graham's Ravine. With a spring in my step, I followed the narrow trail through the woods, embracing the sense of nature that surrounded me. The constant dripping of the previous night's rainfall joined in its voice to the native fauna and seemed to push me along. Before long, I emerged from the trail and found myself standing at the edge of a jagged cliff, the grassy ground abruptly giving way to a rocky vertical face that tumbled down nearly 100 feet to the floor of the ravine below. The base of the gulf was filled with an angry flow of a narrow river, though I suspected that it was likely the storm from the night before that made it so. It was probably that it was ordinarily a little more than a meandering creek when the weather was dry. Spanning the ravine was an old and weather-worn rope suspension bridge with a gap-toothed wooden plank beckoning for travelers to cross. That didn't look too trustworthy in my opinion, so I decided to keep my feet on solid ground for the day. Perhaps I'd be a little more braver another day and try my luck with the bridge. Instead, I raised my camera and removed the lens cap, bringing it up to my eye and taking several pictures of the scene, including one point-of-view shot looking across the bridge itself as if the viewer were ready to step onto the span. I was pleased with that one. I felt it added a little drama to the rest. After a while, I replaced the lens cap and continued my exploration of the area surrounding the ranger station, eventually finding myself back at the cabin in the waning afternoon light. All in all, it had been a peaceful and pleasant day, and I'd wrap it with some light cores around the station before calling it a day. That evening, I copied the images from my earlier outing to my tablet and was lazily swiping through them as I picked at my dinner. I reached the set that I had taken at the rope bridge and smiled at them. They turned out better than I had hoped, better than I expected, and the POV shot across the span was the best one of them all. I wish I had thought to use a little more field of view for added drama, but I could take care of that with editing. I didn't think that would be necessary though. I was sure I'd end up with hundreds of similar shots by the end of this posting. Something in one of the shots at the bridge caught my eye, and I set my plate aside as I zoomed in closer to the image. In the foliage across the ravine, a half hidden behind a tree, was what looked like a tall and possibly thin man. He appeared to be leaning around the tree and staring directly at me. Thinking it was just a trick of the light as it played upon the undergrowth, I checked other photos and gasped audibly, startled at what I saw. In each of the images taken at the ravine, the figure appeared. In the first few, it seemed to be moving slowly among the trees, oblivious to my presence. Then suddenly, in the next few frames, there it was, standing behind the tree, staring directly at the camera, directly at me. The man was tall. He must have been well over 6 feet and very thin. He appeared to be dressed head to toe in some sort of black cloak or cape, and only his pale bald head and hands were otherwise visible. Most unsettling, however, were his eyes, which were unusually large and dark, like fist-sized black marbles set into his pale face. I couldn't really make out much more detail than that. He hadn't been the focus of my shot, and there was no other way to enhance the area of the image any further. My attempts to zoom in more only succeeded in pixelating the image and obscuring the man. At first I was more than a little shaken, but then I thought about it more and chided myself being so easily started. Sure, the encounter was an unusual one, but Gibson had told me the trail that laid beyond the ravine had been a popular one. Just because the Forestry Service had decided to stop maintaining it didn't mean the adventurous hikers didn't still travel it. That would also explain why the department wanted to maintain a ranger's presence here. If the trail was still being used, even unofficially, they would still want a ranger nearby in case of trouble. It all fit together nicely, and my nerves eased a little bit. Still, a small glass of Johnny Walker was always welcome, so I started a fire and settled in for the night. During the light cleaning I had that afternoon, I had found another couple of crumpled papers behind the wastebasket and had set them aside to the end table to review later. Now as I start again before the crackling fire, I examine the 2 additional papers and feel the chill of dread climb from the base of my spine as I read the incredibly chaotic script.
Something was outside the cabin again last night. It wasn't just hiding in the trees anymore. I feel like it's seen me, like it's taking notice of me now. I know how crazy this sounds, but it's the only way I can explain it. Elliot Barnes will be out here in 2 days to resupply me, and I'll leave with him when he gets here. They could find someone else to sit out here in this deserted ranger station. There's no need for any of us to be here, and I really don't think we belong here. I don't think it likes people being here. I don't think it likes being noticed.
I straightened my hunched position I had unconsciously taken while examining the pages, stretching out the knot that had formed in the muscle of my neck as I stood and glanced over the darkened window that ridged the cabin walls. During the day, they provided welcoming light and plenty of ventilation to the interior, but now, at night, they made me feel vulnerable. Anything could be outside, looking in at me through any of these windows, and I wouldn't even know it. I could be surrounded by watchers on all sides and never have a clue. Get yourself together, for Jesus' sake. Shaking myself back to my senses. This is stupid. I've been in areas more remote and dangerous than this before. This was a posting that gave to rookies. Simple, safe, difficult to get too much trouble here. That being said, I didn't hesitate to ensure the front door was locked and secured, and figured tonight I could sleep without the windows being open. Things would look a lot different in the morning. I was starting to agree with my predecessor. A rifle would have gone a long way towards settling my mind at ease right about now. The rain came again that night, with less fury, but greater volume. I tossed and turned in my sleep, never finding a comfortable position. In fact, it was less the mattress and more my imagination keeping sleep at bay. I couldn't coax my mind to quiet and calm itself. In the darkness, it insisted on constructing sinister images to keep me awake. When I opened my eyes, it continued, making shapes of the furniture around me into alien and menacing forms. I turned over on my side with frustration, forcing my eyes closed and focusing on the hissing sound of the rain on the metal roof above me. Normally, it would provide the perfect environment to lull me into a deep and restful sleep, but now it only serves to mask the sound of anything that might be sneaking around outside the cabin. Stop it, I told myself, opening my eyes, and I froze as my eyes fell upon the grotesque pale face at the nearest window, staring in at me with some detached and inhuman curiosity. Black eyes were huge and unmoving. Even as I watched rivulets of rainwater stream down its face and over them, I could see small tremors in the white skin of its face as it almost seemed to tremble minutely, as if it didn't have full control of its body. Involuntarily, I abruptly sat right up in my bed in shock, and without changing the blank expression, the face somehow seemed to grow agitated. I didn't think it liked to be noticed. Those words from Ed Marsh's page floated to my mind, and I thought he could be right. In an instant, it faded away from the window, leaving only blackness in its wake. Was it gone? Was it moving to another window? Was it waiting for me? It wasn't an animal, that much I could tell. If it was a man, I needed to understand what he wanted. If it wasn't a man, I needed to understand what it was. I couldn't stay here for another month, with this thing haunting me every night, every day, almost wondering if and when it would come for me. What if I hadn't awoken when I did? Would it have grown bolder? Would it have came inside? I'm going out there. I don't have any weapons other than this can of bear spray, but I have to know. I can't just stay here and wait for it to find me. I can't wait for it to wear me down from exhaustion and lack of sleep. If I'm going to confront it, it needs to be now. I wanted to write this all down before I went out there, just in case. I don't know what's going to happen or what's out there, but I have to know. Hopefully, I'll have more information to update this journal in a while. Wish me luck.
The preceding pages were discovered in a journal left by the forest ranger I was sent here to relieve. I can't find any trace of him other than his camera and some other personal effects, but the ranger that dropped me off said that he just went missing one day. From what he was telling me, that's not exactly an unheard of occurrence at this station. Some people just can't handle the isolation. Reading his journal, it sounds like he was more than a little unhinged and experiencing hallucinations. I've long thought the Forestry Service needed to institute psychological evaluations before they sent people out into the wilderness in complete solitude. One thing I can agree with my predecessor on, however, is that I need to keep the door locked at night. It sounded like something pretty big was moving around outside in the rain last night. I'm going to get some trail cameras tomorrow, I think. But if I hear it outside again tonight, I'll need to check it out.